Okay, folks, I just wrote another piece for Times of Israel. Now, some of my viewers probably don't like that, but fuck you. In any case, it's been kind of a lot of writing this weekend, a lot of I like some weekends just to do a little less videos and writing instead. Of course, there was the other one about late night comedy and the effects on the election, but this time I did write something sort of as as a reaction to what happened with Pittsburgh, and I actually have another one that I might as well talk about here, which is the one on Hard News Network, because the one on Times of Israel is actually not even up, but the one, so hold on. So I did write one in general about identity politics on the left that is a little more broad, not too broad, but it does deal with Hispanic and Hispanic, Latino, and Latinx, and Black and Jewish Americans. And you can see here I'm NPCing the pictures of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the Jewish representative, Keith Ellison, the Black representative, and Luis Gutierrez, who's a Dominican Hispanic representative. I think he's Dominican, doesn't matter. Maybe, no, he might be Puerto Rican, within the Democratic Party. And my piece is called "The Left Will Defend Your Identity Until You Hemorrhage to Death, or They Can Pretend to Mourn You." And I go through basically all of the different issues where they basically just have people stand in as the like they used to do with chiefs in Africa. The colonial authorities, the British or the French, would find these African chiefs and basically force them to be their representative over their people and lord over them, and eventually to subjugate them. And it's the same. That's basically. And I don't want to get too postmodern over it. I'm just saying it's an analogy. It's an analogy, as Hank Williams Jr. would say. It's an analogy for colonialism towards minority groups in the U.S. It doesn't mean that necessarily if you're black or whatever, Hispanic, that you can't vote for any of the parties, including the Democrats. But that's really the way I feel. I don't really think that the Democrats represent me in any sort of way anymore. The few issues where I may have had commonality with them don't really seem to be that important. So looks like I have to get rid of this photo because it's twice. But basically, there's an issue happening that I've noticed for a long time. There is a such thing, and it's existed since well into the 19th century, called the progressive Zionism, progressive and socialist Zionism. That is basically something that helped to establish the state of Israel back in the early part of the 20th century. And the first few prime ministers of Israel, Ben Gurion and Eshkol and Meir, the mayor and Moses Zarate and Yitzhak Rabin, all of those were the first. They were from that movement, and then since then they've had progressively less and less power because gradually other right-wing movements have kind of supplanted them, and also the country has moved away from socialism over there. So that's not necessarily the focus here, but during that period there was a little more of a commonality between the progressives movements in the USA and those over there. Okay, especially prior to the Six-Day War of 1967, there was a little more of an affinity because back then it was considered a pioneer state, and the politics and symbolism of these people who were going out to the desert to farm were very important to the people of the Jewish American community, for example. And let's be honest here, and I'm not doing any favors for myself. A lot of the Jewish American community back then and up till today are very sympathetic to socialism or social democracy, or even further to the left causes, democratic socialism and even communism. I mean, remember the Rosenbergs. I of course have kind of moved completely away from any sort of. I'm almost, uh, inclined to libertarianism. Like probably closest to libertarianism is my philosophy. So I go through a lot of the issues here, which are that essentially what's going on with the what's left of the progressive Jewish community, what's left of the liberal Jewish community, which are those are the people that write in the Atlantic and on MSNBC or whatever presentable mainstream publication you're talking about. The Jews that are active in those, they're not standing up for civil liberties the way that at one point a lot of Jews were. Okay, I would say that there are if you are Jewish and you're standing up for those values, you're more than likely not with the left wing media. You're not with any of these left wing groups. Alan Dershowitz, to some extent, is still standing up for civil liberties. I wouldn't say he's completely consistent on it, but you know, this isn't really about him. But he's also being ejected from the left, and that's why I titled this "Progressive Liberal Zionism is Bleeding Out. Walk away before you're ejected." So essentially, I go through all of the different issues that are going on within progressivism in America over the past couple years, and you have to remember that, and this I didn't even mention in this, but at the DNC, there was a lot of far left activism going on there, and understandably so, because a lot of the delegates elected to the DNC to the convention were Bernie Sanders supporters, and those Bernie Sanders supporters happen to be far left. And among the far left causes that they support is the Palestinian cause. So you did see a number. Here you can see. Let me show you. So you can pretty much see here. This is pretty. So you have this graphic over here. This is from Pinterest. You have this from Middle East Forum. Okay, it's the same photo essentially. Let me see here. And you have the same issue happening at the Labor Party conference this year. So 2 years ago it was at the Democratic convention, and you see a lot. Linda Sarsour is over there too, in 2016, and people are just they're and you know what do you want? You want them to not waive it? You want them to not, so that they won their place at the convention, and then you're saying, well, they shouldn't have to be able to display their flags. I would say that shows the real values and the real beliefs of, if not the Democratic Party as a whole, then the real future of the Democratic Party. Those are the people that are really making inroads into it. And those that will say, well, you're really exaggerating it. In the past 2 years, it's become, not only was it true at the time, it's become more true today. But we'll get to that. So I don't support the Palestinian cause, but I do believe they should be allowed to display their flags at a convention that some of their delegates were elected to. And I talk about basically here the Women's March, the March for Science, the March for Our Lives. So what happened? Okay, we have to remember the past 2 years. Okay, whether the Democrats win in the midterms this Tuesday or they lose in the midterms and the Republicans remain in control, it's either way, there has to be a reckoning for what's happened in the past 2 years after President Trump or after Donald Trump was elected president-elect. They started to realize that in order to address his popularity, they pretty much had to create the facade that they have a similar movement coming forward of grassroots activism. So they astroturfed it. They astroturfed it very much in the form of Indivisible, in the form of the Women's March, in the form of the March for Our Lives after Parkland shooting, in the form of the March for Science, which doesn't mean shit. So all these movements started, and it's all astroturfing, because in the reality they don't organically stay together. You have to have massive efforts to pull these people together and get them to really buy into it. And I don't really see it that much. And for example, I would say here that a lot of their objections don't necessarily line up with anything to do with feminism science or or whatever. You have the objection to the travel ban of 2017. Now, the Women's March objected to that on the grounds that it oppresses people of color. But the fact is that that executive order eventually was upheld by the Supreme Court. I believe it was two different decisions because there were two different uh, executive orders. Jeez. But both of those executive orders were upheld by the Supreme Court, and it was well known that that would happen. It's just that these progressive organizations, what they were doing was they were playing chicken. They were hoping that their public pressure and their demonstrations would cause these executive orders to be withdrawn, and it hasn't happened because Donald Trump does not cuck to the losers on the left. It just doesn't happen. Then another issue which I find was interesting, but it's not necessarily the most important one within the Women's March, was the Title IX guidelines that Trump was removing. These were basically creating a parallel system of justice with no presumption of innocence on college campuses. And then, of course, there are other issues where he's been accused of alleged ties to white supremacists, the Access Hollywood leaked tape, and sexual assault allegations against him, and of course the Russian collusion narrative. So those are the things that basically everything that fueled the Women's March, it has been fed by narratives that are essentially just cannon fodder from the mainstream media. These are things that yes, there is certain there's trace elements of these problems within the Trump administration, but none of them are illegal. None of them have really dented his support. They're really only issues for people who never liked Donald Trump to begin with. And if you talk to the average voter for Donald Trump in Nevada, well, he didn't win Nevada anyway, but let's say in Iowa, let's say in Wisconsin, I would say that there's other issues that they would probably worry about, such as the tariffs and such as some of the healthcare issues where he hasn't come through totally. So they focused a lot on the style over the substance. And then I go through a lot of the issues of the white supremacy allegations against Trump, which in reality, if you look through them, white supremacist movements have actually gotten weaker under Trump in the past year. The Unite the Right rally actually did the opposite. There is an active war, not a violent war, but an active, I would say, conflict between identitarian white nationalists who are against violence, such as Jared Taylor, who, on the left, it doesn't matter because once you have any sort of racial belief system like Taylor does, you're automatically the devil himself. And the real, like the hardcore, bitter, dead ender ones like Paul Nealon and Patrick Little, they don't get along. So there is no unity on the right. In fact, it's basically, this year they had the 1 year anniversary of the rally, and it was just a joke. Almost nobody showed up, and there were more police and counter demonstrators by a massive proportion than there were actual demonstrators. And then the far right candidates, the ones that are bona fide anti-Semites that have run in elections, such as Patrick Little and Paul Nealon, they've been complete failures. Nealon actually failed to attract. I think he attracted almost half of the vote in 2018 that he did in 2016, and that was when he was running against Paul Ryan, who was getting increasingly unpopular at the time in 2016. Now he's running against basically he was running against a guy who was a Nealon, a Ryan puppet, and he couldn't even get. I think he got into fourth place, if I'm not mistaken. Then Patrick Little came in 13th place, and I'm not even going to tag him in this video because then you have all of his morons commenting and talking about, oh, he's really good. No, he did so well as a Republican in the Senate primary this year that he's running for president in 2020 as a Democrat. That's how good he's doing, and I linked to that. Okay, so those of you that are interested, you can actually go to his website and see how this white supremacist that's been so empowered by the GOP and Donald Trump, he's so empowered that he's become a Democrat, at least according to him, and he's running for president as a Democrat. And this is it's his blog. Okay, it's not as if I found this from some other friendly site. The left. So the other issue is I go through Steve Bannon and everything. Now, everything that they call Steve Bannon, I actually don't have a problem with Steve Bannon. There's a number of economic areas where I don't think I really agree with him very much. And then there's other issues where I think he's just telling the plain, honest truth. But I don't see him really as the gargoyle that the media portrays him as. And one of the main issues that I see with that is that really the biggest allegation that they have is that his ex-wife claimed during a divorce proceeding that he said something derogatory towards Jews when his daughters were supposed to go to some school somewhere in Virginia that was, I guess, heavily populated with Jews. So maybe it happened, maybe it did not. Don't care personally. It happened. If it did happen, it was over 10 years ago. Okay, and even if it did happen in the context of a divorce proceeding, how do you even know? It's really ridiculous that these types of things even, like, who would care? I personally don't care. The second allegation against Bannon is basically that when he ran Breitbart, the comment sections would just become full of these anti-Semites and whatever, and they would harass Ben Shapiro and stuff like that. Ben Shapiro at the time was a Breitbart writer, and in answer to that, Shapiro himself has said that Bannon is not an anti-Semite, he's just an asshole. And I have the link to the video here, which we're not going to watch today because we're trying to cut this a little shorter. So once Trump was installed in the White House, his opponents proposed that Bannon was this seven-headed Hydra beast of hate that would initiate a Kristallnacht Kentucky style. But once he was fired, they basically celebrated. There was the Huffington Post headline that said "Goy bye," which is, I would say that's one of the dumbest pieces of journalism I've ever seen. It's basically validating everything that the actual white nationalists would say about the media. Well, you're basically feeding the trolls. That's what they did, and it was one of the worst pieces of journalism I've ever seen. And I believe they ended up having to take it down. That was Lydia Polgreen. This really a brilliant piece of journalism from her. But once he was gone, what were they supposed to do? They can't just their biggest enemy, the one that they consider to be Trump's Goebbels or whatever, Stephen Bannon, is gone. So who do they focus on in order to paint the administration as anti-Semitic? Because his other advisor, Stephen Miller, is Jewish. So what ended up happening was that after the Roy Moore Senate election debacle, all they had to do was basically ignore Steve Bannon and not even pay attention to him. But they ended up doing the opposite. And gradually over the past year, because Bannon's been going around Europe and promoting his populist message there, they've basically been giving him credit. Okay, and I don't think he fully deserves that credit anyway. But he does some work that is, I guess, effective in connecting different international nationalist movements. If I don't know, I think it's called that. So I know it sounds contradictory, but he's very effective at connecting them and having them network. But they're basically making the case that it's him doing it, that all of these governments in Italy and in Hungary and in Austria and wherever, they're not falling from power and being replaced by populists because they're ineffective and they're run by incompetent elitists. They're being just overthrown by Steve Bannon and his evil cabal of international hate mongers. That's basically that's what they're saying. Whether it's Brazil or whether it's Italy, nothing is intrinsically going wrong with what's going with those countries. That's what they believe. They believe it's really Steve Bannon that's doing it all. They think that those countries are otherwise in perfect order, and that really, if it wasn't for this out of shape former naval officer from Virginia, this whole populist revolution thing would kind of be, just a passing wave or something. And I think they still think it's a passing wave. And so they keep interviewing him. And I just gave like a selection of 5 mainstream publications that interview Steve Bannon, who after being fired from the White House again, could have become completely irrelevant if not for the media that needs him. They absolutely need Stephen Bannon in order to remain relevant, in order to continue to stoke this mythological clash between the races, because they're actually ignoring everything that this guy is talking about. I actually watched the Stephen Bannon debate with David Frum yesterday, the monk debate, and it was a pretty decent debate, and I can't say that Frum actually swung me or anything. And at the end of the debate, this crowd of people, this crowd of mostly liberal Canadian Toronto residents, that they had been against Bannon virtually the entire time, and they had basically applauded every one of Frum's statements. So the question was, is populism going to be the future in world politics? And Bannon was arguing yes, and Frum was arguing no. Well, in the end, even though they clapped all the time for Frum, they voted all for yes. They were voting that Bannon was right. So even the people who hate him, the people who think that he's some sort of ogre, know that what he's doing is working, and it's ridiculous to continue to pretend otherwise and to believe this nonsense from the media. And then I go into a lot of the issues of the actual protest movements and everything, that they've been dwindling. Remember last year, if you look at the entire Women's March, the original Women's March on January 21st, 2017, there were 3 to 4 million people worldwide demonstrating in it. I believe that there were about 1 million in Washington, D.C. Yeah, there were. The second annual event, according to one estimate, was only 10,000 demonstrators in D.C. I think it was 200,000 in New York City. So it's not getting stronger. I mean, people are getting protest fatigue. People can't continue to come out and take days off of work and just go to these protests. I didn't get to go. The day of the inauguration, I was at work. I didn't get to watch the inauguration. I had to watch a replay of it later. Okay, so a lot of these people, they were going to these demonstrations. They were taking days off of their job or whatever. Eventually, either they don't work, so it doesn't matter, or they ended up having to go back to work, because it's not like you get to just go demonstrate whenever you want. Or if you do, then your boss is a moron. So I go and say at the end, we're not going to read the whole thing, that if you look at the liberal progressive Zionists, these movements, Torah, Trump's hate, Bend the Ark, I guess would technically be one. The one that they were called Jewish leaders. They're after the Pittsburgh shooting. They're probably only a handful of people active in the movement anyway, but they were called leaders. Even though I don't personally know anybody from the movement, I don't know anybody who has interacted with anybody from the movement. They're not visible here. Nobody knows anything about them. They were founded by Alexander Soros. It's well known. In any case, what have they accomplished in 2 years? Okay, what have they done? What are their receipts? That's what I ask. You have this contingent in Congress, the Nakba Caucus, with Rashida Tlaib, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Andrew Gillum running for governor though, Ilhan Omar, and then Keith Ellison running for Attorney General. Yeah, that's what you've gotten in 2 years. That's why I'm saying that if the Democratic Party wasn't becoming increasingly hostile to the ideas of Zionism or Israel back in 2016, for sure now it's even more so. For sure, those people are going to have a larger share of the power now, that they're actually going to have people in office. People are trying to stave off Ocasio-Cortez's election in New York City. I don't really believe they're going to succeed. I think she's going to get in. Tlaib is not even running against anybody. I think she's running unopposed. Omar is also, I believe, running unopposed. And Gillum and Keith Ellison are running in statewide races, so they might not win at all. But if you're talking about people in Congress, these aren't even all the people. There's Leslie Coburn. There's all the Farrakhan supporters, okay, which I didn't even go into. So that's really what you can point to as the progress over it's negative progress for these people. Liberal Zionism is a failure. It's a complete and utter failure. There is nothing for them to point to as a success story. Then you get the issues that there are issues where progressives and non-progressives have some common ground. You know, people people in the U.S. they're not satisfied with the two-party system. A lot of people would like ranked choice voting, where if you wanted to, you could vote for the Green Party, you could vote for the Libertarians, you could vote for Peace and Freedom Party, you can vote for Working Families Party, you could vote for the Prohibition Party. Fuck if I know. There's all sort. There's the Constitution Party. There's all sorts of other third parties. You could do ranked choice where you could vote for the number one, and then the number two would, let's say, be the Democrats or the Republicans. That is an idea I think anybody, I've talked to Carlos about it. I've talked to people from the West Coast, Bernie people about it. I don't think that there's anybody who's not completely bought into the partisan two-party duopoly who would object to that. And then overturning Citizens United. I think that there's lots of appeal, not just on the left, for overturning Citizens United. Getting money out of politics. I think a lot of people are realizing that the Democratic Party has become just as corrupted by lobbyists and special interests as the Republicans once were accused of, and they still are, by the way, corrupted by it. So I would say this, okay? Once this comes out, this piece is not out yet, but I am going to try to add it as soon as it is published. And I'm going to put the other one from Hard News Network. I want you to share it. I want you to also read it through. And I want you to think about it, okay? These groups that are basically, they're all the time talking about resistance, and they're talking about leading with our values, and they're talking about, not in our name, and if not now, and blah, blah, blah. Do they really have a vision for what's going to be, how this country is going to be run, or are they just repeating things that people are telling them? They're not. I think that if there was a real protest movement in the United States, whether under Trump or under Barack Obama, it would be proposing real changes to the economic and social system here. For example, like the ranked choice voting and the overturning Citizens United. Those would be important ones. The Bernie people want to reinstate Glass-Steagall. The Republican right, the Freedom Caucus type people want to basically audit the Fed. That's something I'm in favor of. Audit the Fed. That's what a protest movement would work for. A real solution for real problems that are affecting the entire country, not some sort of symbolic crap like these people are. Anyway, I will talk to you guys again, maybe even today. But in the meantime, enjoy this, and please like this video, share it, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to my other channel, Razor Ray Live Wounds, and also comment when this video uploads. And I'll talk to you later. Have a great Sunday night.